Roblox the growth trajectory that it's gone on in the last 5 years is just insane.
Netflix have a show called Perfect Match, which is just trash TV really, but it's essentially bringing together people that have appeared on all of its other shows. So you start to get this crossover effect.
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit Podcast, the show for people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working in the industry, I've brought together leading executives to host conversations with decision makers across innovation, marketing, media, finance and performance, unpacking their strategies and industry shaping ideas.
It's lovely to have you on and to have this opportunity to chat directly with you rather than us interviewing somebody.
It is. It's lovely. I'm got my coffee. I'm ready. I'm ready for the chat.
Nice. You're stepping in for Drew. But I think we'll have a good time as well. And I'm excited to hear your pitch. I feel like this is a really well thought out pitch. And obviously you've ideated on it quite a bit already and alluded to it in a few articles. So
it's one of those things. It was an idea, an itch that I had to scratch. So I wrote it all down. It might forever remain a crazy pipe dream. Who knows? Or somebody will give me a big check one day.
I quite like the idea of just putting it out into the universe via this podcast. And then hopefully somebody listening is like either on the same wavelength or they pick it up and want to run with it. And so hopefully even if the idea itself doesn't manifest, it manifests other concepts or there's elements of it that apply to other areas, right? Like the last episode, which was on like a physical museum for the Premier League in London. Like maybe that doesn't happen, but maybe another rights holder was already thinking about physical space and it helps them to better think through the realities of that or why that might be a good idea or a bad idea. Anyway, we'll jump into your pitch. I'll let you go first. And I've also tried to think about an idea that's media related because obviously being the co-host of the media podcast, I felt like I should lean into media this week. And
probably wise, or else I might not offer very good advice if there's anything outside of media. I know nothing about ticketing or in stadium kind of organisation. So yeah, good idea. Tell me the rules though. Tell me how this works.
The rule is, or the idea is, you pitch an idea.
Got it.
And then I'll tell you how brilliant or rubbish I think it is. And I'll ask you some questions to kind of maybe try and flesh out the idea if there's any areas that are a little bit unclear. And the first half of the show is essentially you pitching your idea and us discussing it. And then the second half of the show is me pitching you my idea and us discussing it. And so, let's try to keep it fairly simple to follow if people haven't listened in too many times before. But as I said, it doesn't have to be factually perfect. It's more about the concept because there's a lot of interview shows out there where you're talking about finalized projects or campaigns that are all glossy and finished. So the idea here is that it's the raw idea, it's what you're starting with, and hopefully that triggers some ideas or thoughts with other people as well.
Okay, so I'm going to go broad first because the concept, I can get into the concept. I have it kind of fleshed out in the sense that I have a name for my idea, but broad brushstrokes. I actually articulated what this idea was in the Sport Business article that I shared recently, which was this hypothesis that the next billion-dollar sport format would come from Roblox. And that was the culmination of, I've been obsessing over Roblox for the last 5 years. Since I left the BBC, I've produced 4 Roblox experiences, I've advised on others, but I really do obsess around the platform because it's such a great space where you can identify behaviors and what users are loving, what they're not loving, everything from game loops to the types of sport that are interesting to me because they're signals and they are trends and habits that are being formed there that will impact the business of sports media in the next few years. So to use the old Wayne Gretzky quote that is rather overused, I like to think that I'm always skating to where the puck is going. I try and think 3 years ahead of where we are now, and that forms what I do, and that's my business. Roblox the growth trajectory that it's gone on in the last 5 years is just insane. They released their Q4 earnings yesterday. The amount of money and the amount of time and the amount of users on the platform is growing hugely. So there's a gravitational pull there that can't be ignored. This hypothesis that the next sports format would grow out of Roblox is grounded in the sense that, much like we've seen from YouTube, we've seen formats emerge on YouTube. We've seen creators emerge on YouTube that have transferred into either cinema. We've got Markiplier this week, who's just debuted a movie, Iron Lung, based on a video game that he played as a YouTube creator. So, sometimes with mixed success. Mr. Beast games, it's moderately successful, but you can't necessarily equate it to the success he has on YouTube. A lot of it's all in the execution. But actually, YouTube has created media companies, new formats. I see Roblox as being where YouTube was about 10 years ago. There are super creators, there are superstar formats incubating on there. There was a big piece of news at the back end of last year that Grow a Garden, which was one of the biggest games on Roblox last year, at one point was getting 23 and 24 million concurrent users in one game alone, had secured a deal with Story Kitchen, who'd made the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, to be developed into a movie. So we've already got similar things happening, things incubating that are making the leap out of Roblox and into other media, much like has happened on YouTube in the last 10 years. So then I start thinking about sport, because I've been watching and tracking a lot of sport games on the platform. I have a little dashboard that gives me the top 50 sport games on Roblox, and I start seeing volleyball's really popular. There's one volleyball game that is stupendously popular that beats out even soccer on the platform. So that starts my mind whirring, because then we've got Kings League and Border League that are new formats, and they're having kind of different levels of success, but are very, very expensive. So then my mind starts thinking, okay, we've got Roblox that has got 140, 150 million daily active users, spending the equivalent of 4 million years worth of time on the platform per quarter. We've got all of these trends and these behaviors that we're seeing bubble up there. Is there an opportunity, or could it be that a new sport format would scale to such a size on the platform that then leagues or exhibition matches, or even informally, organically, would start popping up in real life? So I started riffing on that, and that really is the context behind what my pitch would be, which is, I can get into it now. It's a new sport that I am going to incubate on Roblox. It's called DropHoop. It lives in Roblox, but then the intention is that it will also live in an arena. A hybrid of tag and kind of parkour meets basketball. So if you think multi-level parkour kind of setup, but with basketball hoops at either end, teams of two that have to go and score baskets, but if you tag someone from the opposing team, play flips over. The idea was that you could spin up a Roblox game with this 2v2 gameplay, parkour meets tag meets basketball, scale it there. If you get even to 10, 20,000 concurrent users consistently in your game Roblox, the game starts to make money and starts to pay for itself. Well, not an easy thing to do. It sounds easy, but it's not an easy thing to do. But if you can scale that digital flywheel, the idea was that you prove that concept, and then potentially there's an IRL version. And the process that I went through in my mind with DropHoop was there has to be some kind of consistency between the rule set on Roblox and the rule set in real life, if it ever makes the leap into real life. You can't have something where gravity doesn't count. And of course, you can't replicate that in real life. So I even went as far as writing a cursory rule set that could give you a little bit more freedom to maybe hang for a couple of seconds with a boost in Roblox, which of course you can't do in real life. But there are things that you can have those points of consistency between the two. Mm-hmm. So in a nutshell, it's this 2v2 multiplayer format. You chase, you score in this crazy arena, you slam dunk, you pass through hoops for trick scores. But if you get tagged by an opponent, it forces a turnover of play. Mm-hmm. Something that you have, 3 10-minute periods, for example. So something that is very watchable, quite fast. Again, we talk a lot about YouTube and digital first sports needing to be fast. That's not because attention spans are short, it's interest spans, but actually 3 10-minute periods. It could work really well in real life. You can make them shorter in the Roblox version, but the structure is the same. Already driven by the fact that we know basketball is a popular sport, as is parkour, obstacle courses, obbies, massive genre of play on Roblox already. So can assume that actually something that includes parkour in a sport feels native and instinctive. And the idea is that this is a hybrid sport that is playable by anyone. One of the key drivers of retention in Roblox, and I believe it's similar in real life sport, is it's got to be easy and instinctive to pick up, but difficult to master. Easy to understand and start playing, but difficult to become elite. So you've got that progression mechanic. Again, really, that's one of the parities between gaming and sport is progression. So playable by anyone, simple to understand, but hard to master, highly watchable, both in Roblox, but if it was in real life, it would feel very YouTube and digital native. There's parity in core gameplay and scoring mechanics between the digital version and the IRL, and it's memeable, it's shareable. So in a nutshell, that's my pitch to you is DropHoop. We're going to incubate it and we're going to scale it on Roblox. And then eventually we're going to move it into real life and it's going to become the next billion-dollar sport format. Give me a check, Andy.
I like it. No, I like it. I mean, I don't have a check to give you, unfortunately, but I do like the idea. My first question would be, given the kind of low... So what I like about it is there's a low barrier to entry in terms of starting it, right? Like you launch the game on Roblox and actually you're essentially saying like, we don't ever commission the in real life version unless it gets to a certain level of popularity, right? So you're getting that buy-in before you go and commission the thing. It's kind of like only commissioning a film if the book's really popular. You're kind of able to wait and see, and then you have the option rights on the real life version if you want them, a bit like you have the movie rights. My question would be, why have one sport? Why not have more of a spray and pray approach? If the barrier to entry is quite low, if you're a private equity company, like firm, for example, instead of investing in DropHoop, like put down 50 sports on Roblox, throw them all out there, just see what sticks to the wall. And then you can essentially just monitor it and be like, okay, well, actually, we thought DropHoop was going to take off, but actually this other sport over here that, I don't know, is a riff on volleyball meets football, for example, actually is the one that everybody loves. So now we're just going to go and commission that as a in real life event. However,
there are infinite versions of DropHoop on behalf of leagues or investors or even brands. I mean, there's interesting opportunity with brands there. Could test at scale these hybrid formats. You know, let's put riding a bike together with parkour, together with frisbee, and see if it works. You could scale, you could create 20 new versions of sports, and you could kill the ones that don't work after 6 months, but the ones that are showing green shoots of growth, you see if they scale. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was thinking about this, it could be done at scale, is I'm looking at brands. You've got Procter & Gamble, or you've got Dove, for example, which is personal care. They spend a lot of money on sponsorships in sport, and I get that. But actually, there could be, how about if Dove and Dove deodorant, let's say, they wanted to own a new women's sport, because they get all of the real estate, then they get, they don't have to pay sponsorship. They own the data, they own the visibility. I could see a situation where a Dove would come to me in my new agency and say, we want to own a sport. Okay, so we'll take what your objectives are and who you're trying to reach. We'll map that over to the behaviors and the user base that we know are popular on Roblox. And we'll come up with 3 or 4 different ideas for sports and we'll test them there for you. And if one tracks, then we scale it and you own it. And we could have the Dove, new name for sport, insert new name for sport here, exhibition tournament next year. And all of that real estate is theirs to own. I think that's quite a compelling opportunity. And that's just for brands. That's not even for sports or federations or governing bodies that might want to come up with a new sport as a way to engage that young digital social first audience. So yes, you are right. It is, as I wrote in that article in Sports Business, it's a Petri dish. It's an innovation lab. And when you can spin up a Roblox game for less than $100,000, and that would be a good high quality one that you could run for 12 months, $1,000 to test something. How much has Baller League spent?
It's an interesting way to reduce cost around the pilot of a new concept before ever really having to commission the in real life version, for sure. I think on the brand side, like, also interesting, we've seen like Estrella, for example, owned part of the paddle tour, which they eventually sold. And they were like a big part of the ownership of one of the tours. I don't want to get the name wrong, but they definitely owned one of the tours and then eventually sold it. Obviously, Red Bull do a lot of kind of like ownership of sports IP, and then essentially see what hits within kind of the Red Bull TV, like what's going to drive new people across Red Bull TV. Anything extreme, they can kind of own. They kind of now own that lane. I think the brand side is interesting. But then you mentioned at the end, like the federations as well, because I think what could be quite interesting is like if you're rugby, for example, go and create 20 rugby derivatives on Roblox, but actually the aim isn't to create a new sports IP. The idea is to create adjacent sports IP that then drives people back to the rugby product. So it then actually just becomes essentially like a marketing flywheel, right? Like people are playing games that are adjacent to golf or adjacent to rugby, and that then drives people to actually play golf or actually play rugby, even if the version on Roblox isn't entirely replicable. Like Rocket League, for example, is super popular, but probably not the easiest thing to replicate in real life, and probably also a lot less dramatic in real life if you were to watch that version versus the game version.
Are there parallels with flag football? Is flag football intended to be a referral pathway to American football?
Yeah, I don't actually know the answer to that. I think I don't know if it is from a participation perspective. Like, I'm not sure how many people transfer from having played flag football across to playing the professional game. Maybe at a very junior level, like if they're under 10s or something and you don't want contact at that point in time. But I'd imagine if a 25-year-old takes up flag football, they're not using that as a bridge across to American football. But maybe it increases fandom of the NFL because you feel like you're aligning yourself with the culture of that sport in some way. And I think that's probably why the NFL's looking at it from, particularly on the women's side, right? Like with female participation, like they're going big on women's flag. And in markets where you haven't got the natural size to play American football. So like markets like Japan, for example, flag football is really taking off. And I think part of that's like, it's a more accessible version of the sport. I think as well, like, as well as potentially creating new IP, there's also an argument that this becomes almost like a referral program for a existing sport.
Currently social native. I think that's the other point that I was going to make with regards to, I mean, it's okay saying that you can incubate this thing and you can scale it in a digital space like Roblox, and then it will make the leap into real life. But one of the interesting things about Roblox is there is a huge amount of content, much like has happened with Minecraft, that is taken from gameplay content and then it's shared on TikTok and it's shared on YouTube and it's shared on social. Almost again, the most popular volleyball game on Roblox is called Volleyball Legends, and this is one that I've been trying. It's huge, but if you go on TikTok and you look for Volleyball Legends game clips, you'll find game clips that have got 1 million, 2 million views. So there's almost digital distribution built into this as well, which is what I think is the neat thing. Because let's go back to DropHoop again, just to give it a name. But if DropHoop took off on Roblox and there's loads of game clips then being shared on TikTok and on YouTube, that's your digital distribution. Again, that's your kind of broadcast proxy that is global by default. So again, that seeds behavior, that seeds demand then for hopefully buying tickets when you decide that you're going to run an exhibition kind of IRL event. So Roblox content on YouTube has just crossed 1 trillion views. At the end of last year, YouTube publish how much game content from each platform is uploaded to YouTube. I think Minecraft is on 3 trillion. I mean, that's way out ahead. But Roblox has just passed 1 trillion views of Roblox gameplay content on YouTube. So you think, again, there's that distribution that's built in, which is so very vital for sports fandom, which it kind of comes with as part of the package, which is why I think this is such a compelling pitch.
Talk me through the like basic economics of how this would work in terms of, like, let's say you put 100,000, you're an investor and you put £100,000 into DropHoop to launch the game for the first 12 months. What needs to happen for you to make your money back? What needs to happen for you to feel like this is something you want to take to the next level? Like, what turns it from, because I think you talked about it being like $1 billion sports franchise, the basic milestones that need to be hit at each point here.
I know, I'm looking at my notes because I had kind of figured out there are certain milestones that you'd want to hit. And actually, alongside those milestones, you'd want certain levers of monetization that you're able to pull. So, of course, this thing doesn't work in real life unless it scales in that digital space. So, yes, you've got to build the game, you've got to launch the game, but then you've got to bring users in, you've got to retain them. That takes time to build. You've got to manage the game, you've got to manage the community, you've got to fix bugs, you've got to do updates, you've got to run events within your game, again, to really get that flywheel spinning. But at some point, like I said, if you can get to consistent 20,000 concurrent users in your game, and there are sports games that achieve that, then you can start to monetize. Now, there's first milestone. If you get to on-platform monetization, the equivalent of your ad revenues on YouTube, then you can actually get the game making money or self-sustaining, which means you don't have to invest in keeping the game going. Then what you can do is you can start selling off-platform merch. So one of the things that's really interesting as Roblox is scaling is the ability to sell merch off-platform. You can integrate with Shopify or you can integrate with Amazon. There are quite a few games that sell, I mean, Creatures of Scenario, for example, which is kind of a fantastical creature game. They sell plushies of their dragons and their creatures, and it can make them nice money. But think about that in terms of fandom. If people are engaging and loving your game enough that they want to buy some merchandise and own what they play, again, there's parallels again with sport and fandom. You start badging, you want to wear a jersey. So maybe in whatever game we come up with in Roblox, we start thinking about franchises a bit like, I don't know, the 100 or whatever. Yeah. Because then you can start tribes and you can start people generating demand for people wanting to badge and own the shirt. So each one of these stages has a kind of, in my head, a bit of a milestone that indicates demand and that starts to show kind of monetization, which again, you start thinking you need those in place if you're going to invest in hiring an arena and promoting an event. And then alongside that is the metrics for that kind of social sharing. So here in my notes here, I've got this flywheel of participation and fandom, free access on Roblox, instant play, skill mastery, engagement. Then you've got watch DropHoop because you've got people sharing gameplay clips on YouTube and TikTok. You could even then, prioritize that kind of shareability. Then you've got IRL, these kind of amateur grassroots. And then you've got creators, you bring creators in, you do merch drops, and you just get this flywheel of fandom and participation going. There are those milestones, as I've just outlined, that actually each one gives you monetization, but also gives you the confidence to move to the next level and maybe invest a little bit more because you're generating that demand as you go. Yeah.
I like the team concept in terms of, like, you start to create more of a bridge there, because I think one thing that challenger leagues have typically struggled with is creating enough of a reason to attach yourself to a brand new team identity, just because there's no heritage or legacy there. The only time it's really worked, or the only challenger leagues where people buy into the teams, is really when you tie it to nationalities. But obviously that then comes with the downside of limiting yourself to, if you've only got 8 teams, then you can only pick 8 countries. So then all of your international fans that sit outside those markets are like, well, who do I support if you haven't got a team from my region? But when teams create identities that don't really have that national tie-in or city tie-in, it can be quite tricky, because it takes time, right, to figure out, like, what does that team stand for versus that team if it's a brand new name and a brand new identity, and okay, it's just the yellow team or the blue team.
And that is the caveat to this whole idea, is time. This kind of thing takes time. And I do wonder if this is one of the challenges with Baller League, is it takes time to build affinity. and that fandom. Of course, we know it exists in sport, but most sports have got 100 years of fandom behind. When you're creating something new, you're 100% right. It takes time to build recognition, relatability, affinity, and fandom. You can't speedrun it. So although I believe in this pitch and I think that there's something in it, because you can test and you can scale this for relatively low cost, if/when an investor comes to me and says, I really like your idea, Jo, let's do this, I would respond it's going to take time. Don't think you're going to have this new super popular sport within 8 months and you're going to be selling out Madison Square Garden in 12. If I know anything about young gamers on Roblox, is that they will make you work hard for their loyalty. They know how valuable their attention and their loyalty is in games. So they want to come back to your game and they want to see that you're updating it and keeping it fresh for weeks, if not months, before they go, okay, we believe you now. You're here for the duration. You're here for, you're showing up for us, right? We're going to keep coming back and we're going to start spending money. So you've got to go through that process. It's not anything that you can cheat overnight. Yeah.
Okay, last question on your pitch. Why is in real life an important component here? Why not just keep it forever digital?
Because there is no replacement for being. So in real life, with your friends, with your fellow fans in a physical space, enjoying something that is culturally special, communally in that moment, showing up to your local football team week in, week out might not be as important to young people as it once was, but they still do value that in real life connection. And if anything, and Alpha in particular are railing against living their lives perennially online. Now they're online a lot. Of course they are. That's the world in which we live. But they're sharing less about themselves than previous generations because they've seen how that can affect them. But they're also valuing in real life experiences again. It's why festivals and live music are enjoying a resurgence. So I think this kind of plays into that. It was conceived of as an idea in a pitch that actually did have that in real life element, because you can already create a game on Roblox, and there are already studios out there that specialize in certain game loops that are just pumping out games and then making a lot of money, and that's great. What I really like about this is the fact that it does have an in real life element. Young people, if they really love a game, they still want to go out in the back garden and set up a rudimentary parkour course and start replicating it. It's no different to what you and I did as kids. We still want to get outside and be physical. And actually, rather than just playing football or rugby, why couldn't it be DropHoop, which is a mixture of parkour and shooting baskets and tag? I mean, again, in my head, when I was thinking about how this idea could work about scaling new hybrid sports and then actually making it something as in DropHoop, kids need physical activity and they need sport, but there's a lot of current sport that isn't accessible to them, either through media or through play. So this could tick that box.
I like it, yeah. I wanted to get your perspective on it. I completely see why in real life would be interesting as a component to this and part of that flywheel to generate more engagement. I
basically thought, would I want to go and watch this? Would I want to watch 3 10-minute periods of 2 teams of 2 chasing each other around a kind of a parkour arena? There could be lights, there could be music.
Yeah.
There's LED illuminated basketball hoops at either end. And let people share. If you're sat in the bleachers and you're watching, let them film it and share it. It's designed to be shareable.
It's interesting because obviously like making it 30 minutes, I guess, works from a media perspective, right? Like easy to have 3 10-minute segments. You could put ads in the middle or have little breaks with presenters where they're doing breakdowns on what's just happened. If you're going to a physical event, is 30 minutes too short?
Well, you'd have just more than one. So a
bit like Baller League, right, where they have multiple games. So you pick like a physical venue and then have multiple games happening kind of like throughout maybe an evening or throughout a day. And people can kind of almost go in and out. It's almost like a festival of the sport to a degree.
Yeah, and you could have a little parkour set up outside and you can go and test your own skills safely. No. I'm thinking about the insurance on that one. Maybe I'll wind that one back.
Maybe it could be sponsored by an insurance company.
or some kind of protective clothing company.
Yeah, no, I like it. Cool.
Your turn.
That's the end of pitch one. And if anyone's got thoughts on that, feel free to drop me a message or Jo a message or share something in the WhatsApp chat. Yeah, you're accountable for your ideas here, Jo. If someone's got something to say, they can share it with us now.
This podcast is produced by O6, but more than just being a production partner, they're also active members of the Sports Pundit community. Having seen the work they're doing across the industry up close, working with leading F1 teams and Premier League clubs, as well as top creators, I'm so delighted to now have them on board and helping to elevate this show to a new level.
My pitch is not quite as advanced as yours in terms of I haven't gone quite as far down the rabbit hole of flashing it all out. And I'm not an expert on media rights, so I may be making some assumptions that aren't right. But the idea started with seeing Joe Marler on the Celebrity Traitors.
Oh, okay.
Basically, like the interest in Joe and also just then rugby more broadly, because people knew that he was an international rugby player or former international rugby player. I was like, this is a really interesting way to engage fans that doesn't have anything to do with rugby. It's just essentially showing off the personality of one of the players that then gets you to buy into them as a person and makes you more interested in the sport. Like super interested in ever since it launched was the NWSL and Alexis Ohanian did an event called the Off Season, which was basically a reality TV show where they had a director who creates other reality TV shows, create this series where you had like, I think it was 10 players living in a house during the off season and basically just create like a reality show around it. So nothing to do with football necessarily, just like them having to do challenges and like live in a house together. Right. But then you get to know them and you're like, well, I know that that person plays for the Portland Thorns or that person plays for so-and-so, Angel City. So I'm now more invested in like tuning into the football and the NWSL. So I feel like there's something there in terms of like greater crossover between sports and the athletes that play them and reality TV, where like you're not trying to make a doc series about your sport. You're just appearing somewhere where people that have never engaged with your sport actually are already interested. And then the third part to this kind of matrix was like Netflix have a show called Perfect Match, which is just trash TV really, but it's essentially bringing together people that have appeared on all of its other shows. So they have like contestants from The Mole and contestants from Love is Blind and contestants from Too Hot to Handle, like all just kind of like converging. And you're like, this is weird. I recognize that person from The Circle and I recognize that person from this other show that I've watched. And you're just like, but you have a level of familiarity because you already know them. So you're more invested in them. So my thought process was basically these sports that are giving away their rights to free to air for either little or no money, part of the contract or part of the agreement with the broadcaster should be that their athletes get the ability to either audition or like a certain number of allocated slots within some sort of reality or game show that that broadcaster has. So you start to get this crossover effect. So for example, if you're a sport that has a free to air deal with the BBC, like one of your athletes should be able to be on the Traitors. Let's use a fake example, right? Let's say like the triathlon is like broadcast free on BBC. Like one of the triathletes should be on the Traitors and I should just get to know that triathlete because they're like a personality that sits within the game show. And then that becomes like a really interesting marketing, a little bit like how Netflix is using characters from across its shows.
Yes.
You're seeing that character show up in the Traitors or in another show. And then you're saying, like, oh, now actually, like when I watch the triathlon, I'm like rooting for that person because like they've probably talked about like their struggles or the challenge to make money in a sport that doesn't make as much money. So I think particularly for like, I don't want to be rude to any sports, but like the tier 2 sports, like the sports where the athletes aren't making a crazy amount of money, like, and the personalities of the athletes are maybe harder to get across because like if you're not interested in triathlon and you create an amazing documentary about the personal struggles of a triathlete, I'm probably not clicking on it because I don't have any affinity to it. Whereas if they turn up somewhere I already know or I already enjoy the format, then I think it starts to be interesting. So yeah, my pitch is basically like there should be some sort of like reality universe where the sports rights start to merge with the other entertainment IP. And I feel like Netflix could do this amazingly. Like if they...
Oh, it's already starting.
Yeah, like if they brought in some of the athletes from, maybe they start to acquire like, or take on the rights for some of these kind of like smaller sports that aren't selling their rights to in big kind of domestic and international broadcast deals. Like if we start to take on sports like one that I actually thought about first when I was thinking about this was Extreme H, which is on ITV4. Like the drivers on that are obviously incredibly talented and they probably have like personalities, but especially in a sport like that where like they're wearing a helmet most of the time, they're in a car, you don't really get to know too much about them. I feel like there's a big opportunity to do something where Netflix adds one of them to The Circle or adds one of them to The Mole or like one of the shows, right? Like I'm not suggesting the athlete goes on Love is Blind and ends up having to propose to somebody, but I feel like there's like an interesting hybrid format that you could create.
I think you're right. I've got various questions. So you're actually talking about something that entertainment has done within itself for a while. You cross-pollinate a comedian into a reality show. That's something that does happen for those very same reasons. It's a way of going fishing in an adjacent pond, isn't it? To migrate audiences around. It's something that is a tactic that's already used in media and entertainment, but that sport has, outside of pundits maybe, have Alex Scott, for example, or they usually retire from
they usually retire.
They're going into punditry and then they end up on Strictly, that kind of thing. But doesn't tend to happen with athletes who are either at pre or at elite status because they're busy being sports people. What I like about this idea is this tension that we have in how is fandom seeded in with young people now. And we know that there's been a shift away from being a fan of a sport or a team more to athlete-led fandom. Given that we've got a cohort of digital native sport fans for whom the phone has been their gateway into fandom and forming parasocial relationships with YouTube creators, it follows that kind of way of forming fandom and affinity, it has moved towards the athlete and away from what is a club, which is relatively amorphous. So I think you're definitely onto something there. My challenge is, does sport as an industry and a media industry, does that think that it's viable as a way to bring in fans, or do they think it kind of cheapens, it's a show pony, you send your athletes out to do an athlete's version of the Traitors, which I actually think would be amazing, but almost in a way is like, they're trying to be celebrities, they're trying to be influencers, and that almost cheapens what being an elite athlete is about. Do you think that sport is ready to consider that with its elite athletes?
Some of it is. I mean, I feel like there's always going to be some pushback, right? Like, I feel like the best example of it right now is Henry Pollock within
Yes,
rugby,
I was just
right? Because you've got like traditional rugby people that are like, oh, that's like, they cringe or they don't like the way that he acts, and they're like, that would cause a problem in the changing room. But they're saying it would have caused a problem in their changing room when they used to play. It might not cause a problem in the current changing room because that's now just the acceptable way, and that's actually what young people want to do, and they want to show off their personality and they want to be more out there. And so actually they're projecting it as if it was exactly the same in every other way other than you've added him into the mix, whereas actually there's been more of a cultural shift entirely around it, right? Like he's not sticking out the same as he maybe would have if he'd done that back in your day, which is like quite often what the pundits will say, oh, that would cause a problem because he would be creating a rift in the team because he's doing all this stuff to draw attention to himself and away from the team, which I don't think is necessarily like fair or accurate for like the current generation of players. That's where it would be a case of saying like, okay, maybe some sports fans wouldn't like it, but they're not the ones watching that show, so it doesn't matter to them.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
I think
he's driving fans of that show across to the sport.
I happen to think you're onto something, but I think it's called tall poppy syndrome, isn't it? And I think a lot of traditional commentators and fans of team sports don't like tall poppies.
I think in the US, this would probably be accepted almost immediately. I think in the UK, it would have to be the right kind of athlete and the right kind of player. And I also think from the right sport, like I think if a Premier League player tried to do this tomorrow, like they would get criticized pretty heavily for it. But I think if it's like, Extreme H or Super Try, or even like, I think, you know, the same way that the NWSL has had its own reality show, like if you got somebody from the WSL, like it would probably drive a lot of interest.
I agree.
In what's going on within women's football, because, and WSL has a partnership with the BBC. So like, is that a way to kind of like flex the relationship and almost like give and take a little bit more? So it's like, we're giving you our rights, but actually, how can your other IP help drive interest?
Having a background in TV, I can see where the logistical issues would come up with that if you're negotiating media rights and then saying, but we want some of our athletes over there featuring in your entertainment shows, which is a completely different department and commission budgeting part.
You'd have to have the right leverage and also the right personality sitting within your organization. You'd have to know who the Henry Pollock within your team is that would be perfect for the show. And so maybe it's not they guarantee them a spot, but it's like, you'll let some of our athletes audition for a spot on the show. So they don't have to appear in every series, but if they audition and they actually would be a great fit, we're open to it.
The thing that works in your favor with that argument, though, is that, I mean, use the BBC, for example. It was the same when I was there 5 years ago, and I believe it's the same now. Any big organization, particularly a media one, when it's split up into BBC Children's and BBC Sport, and you've got news and you've got current affairs, they do tend to work in their silos, and it's always a challenge, but it's also it's always an edict. Try and cross-pollinate more. So actually that lends weight to your argument, that they do want to cross-pollinate more, because that is a way of retaining audiences and also retaining relevance as an organization like the BBC. There is an argument that even though logistically there are barriers, it does tick a lot of boxes for a media company or a broadcaster like the BBC. The other thing that I'm thinking, again, lends weight to your argument, and I'm trying to find fault with it, is it's something that has almost been proved already by social media, in the sense that when you were talking, I was thinking about Ilona Maher, because I first encountered Ilona Maher on social, well, and through the Olympics, but that was when I first encountered her on social. When I saw what she did, and I do think she's brilliant, when she joined Bristol Bears for that 3 months, Bristol Bears streamed one of their matches on YouTube. So I hopped onto YouTube to see whether Ilona Maher, as you know, USA rugby player and social media creator, influencer, would bring people to, you know, a Bristol Bears match on YouTube. And so, of course, I had the comments scrolling and I was reading them because it was really interesting. That was proof positive to me that actually she could bring new fans to the game of rugby, because the comments were like, I've never watched rugby before. And they were really smart, because the commentator had been briefed to be a little bit more explanatory in the commentary. And even the comments were saying, I've never watched rugby before, but I now understand it more, because the commentator was also servicing that. For me, it was a real masterclass, a proof point that a talent could bring new fans and audience to a sport. Now, what you're saying is the same thing, but you're just saying you would use it across a more established, maybe traditional medium. I think it could really work in migrating audiences into watching sport.
Because then you also would, if you're that broadcaster, use that as part of your marketing campaign, right? It would be, watch so-and-so who was on the Traitors now playing elite level rugby or elite level cricket or whatever it is, right? You would try and time it in some way, right? So like it's just after or just before a major event. Obviously that's a little bit challenging in terms of training schedules, but for example, with the Traitors, I feel like they film it quite far in advance, right? So if you're a rugby player, they probably film it in the summer. Let's say they film it July, August time, which maybe you can get the time off. Like there's some logistical stuff you'd have to figure out, but let's say you could get the time off in July to film it, but your season doesn't start, or your preseason starts in August. Then it gets released. I think it came out January 1st. So then it runs from January 1st through to towards the end of January. Then immediately you could be like, that person that was on the show is now playing at the Six Nations.
Yes. Yeah.
And so suddenly like you've got all these people that are like, oh, I'll go watch like that game at the Six Nations because I get to watch Joe Marler play rugby for England. And now I'm suddenly interested. Obviously there's people that are going to watch anyway. So the rugby, for the already existing rugby fan, if they don't care about the Traitors, fine. Some of them will, and they'll be like, oh, that's actually quite interesting because I get to see a new personality, like a new side of an athlete. But you also get the people that come across that weren't interested before.
Yeah, I think that's the key. It's the new fan referral, if you like. That
in a way that's not too overt or pushy. Like, you're just watching the show and they just happen to be a professional triathlete or a professional rugby player or Formula E driver, right? Like, and they just happen to be on the show as a contestant alongside normal people. We haven't got time to go into it, but the other way that I think this would be really cool is like, you just completely borrow the IP. So rather than create the NWSL's off season, you basically say, we want to create the Traitors, but with 20 contestants that are all players, like to do their own mini version. We'll host it at St. George's Park instead of Millie Bright ends up being the traitor. And you could create so much drama around it, right? And you'd see all the personalities and also how the athletes interact with one another, like who's friends with who, which is all the kind of stuff that people want to understand. But it's in a format that you know is entertaining and works.
Now, question, why is that not happening already then? Because it could, I mean, you couldn't wholesale copy the Traitors, but those kind of formats you can recreate. Then it's not difficult to come up with a reality. Yeah. I'm aware it is quite difficult. The guy that came up with the Traitors was trying to sell it for 7 years before it got made. But you can create formats. Already in sports then, do you think it's because there's a lack of creativity in sport, or someone like IMG or, I don't know, the Premier League hasn't thought to invest in that? Because in theory, it could happen now.
Would imagine that the challenge most of the sports come up against is athlete access and availability and like getting sign off. Because, for example, if a league had the idea, they would need to get buy-in from the clubs, which would then create friction because like which clubs get the exposure. So maybe it would be easier for a club to do it and just to kind of like mandate it to all of their players, or for a smaller organization. But then it comes down to resource, right? So it's where I think it would be interesting is it's like, is there some sort of like tit for tat thing where it's like, well, we'll give you our rights, but we want some rights from you actually as well, which is like the ability to use your format of the Traitors to do our own mini game that we'll film and broadcast to, maybe it's not even that you broadcast it on the BBC, maybe it's just you borrow the format and do like a mini Traitors version and put it on YouTube.
I mean, this is the kind of thing that I could see arcade media making. Probably more than a traditional sports media producer or even a broadcaster. This is the kind of thing that they would come up with or could come up with and then put it out on YouTube. And that could be really powerful.
I think, well, the idea of having these pictures is like, there's not the entire answer there, but there's like maybe breadcrumbs of an idea that then lead to something, or someone goes, yeah, why isn't this something we've thought about? Like maybe this is an angle to bring up or to consider when we're thinking about the next big content idea. Anyway, we're out of time, so I'll wrap up the pitch.
Well, I'm sold on your idea. What it boils down to is, how do you bring new fans and new interest and audiences into sport? And it is through those characters, as you said, with off season, or like mentioned about Joe Marler. So anything that you can do that takes those characters and puts them somewhere else as that referrer is currently under leveraged in sport. I'm just thinking back to when I first saw Carl Fogarty years ago on I'm a Celebrity. I didn't know who he was, but he was such a compelling personality. You go and check out what he did, and he was a motorcyclist. So actually, it's not anything that doesn't already exist, but probably not being leveraged enough in sport. So I do think you're onto something.
Yeah.
Good pick.
Cool. Well, this is fun. It was enjoyable having you on. We'll have to have you back. Maybe we can have like me, you, Andrew on an episode fairly soon, because I feel like you guys could also chat media. And I'll see you on the Sports Pundit Media podcast very soon, I'm sure.
We've got some good guests coming up.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast, kindly produced by the amazing team at O6. I'll include more information about the guests and the topics covered in the show notes. Head to sportspundit.co to find previous editions, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.